everybody. Welcome back to a Kitecast episode. I'm here with my co-host, Tim Freestone. Hey, Tim, how are you doing?
Good. How you doing, Patrick?
Just fine. We have a real treat today for our listeners. We're joined by a longtime friend of mine from Boulder, Colorado, Josh Horwitz. He has done a number of things. He's sort of a serial entrepreneur. So we're going to get a different perspective in terms of how do you evolve your career from a cybersecurity software leadership standpoint. But then, he has built a couple of very, very successful startups from the ground up and sold one, and he's working on another one right now. Josh currently is the COO and co-founder over at Enzoic, which is a Boulder-based company. And I'm going to let him talk about what they do, and we're going to delve into some of the things that they do around the dark web, just to set expectations for our listeners. And I suspect we're going to learn some things that we don't know about the dark web. Josh, before we dive into those details, let's talk a little bit about your background, because it really is quite fascinating. I first met you, I think it was back in 2003. You had recently started a company called Boulder Logic. You'd come over there from a lengthy, successful career at IBM. What made you want to leave IBM and go into the startup realm? And why did you pick the realm of customer marketing or customer reference database marketing?
Sure. Yeah. So I kind of always knew that I was entrepreneurial minded. When I did my MBA, it was very focused on entrepreneurship. And then next thing I know, I'm working for Big Blue. And so that discord eventually I needed to resolve. But one of the things that I saw in working for IBM and then a couple companies after that was that the most valuable thing that you could do to support sales and marketing was to have happy customers that would speak to your prospects. And yet each place I went was sort of reinventing the wheel in terms of how do you kind of make that happen? How do you build an army of customers that are willing to provide testimonials? And so that was really what the driver was. And, I had a feeling that if I could kind of put a program in a box that was focused on building a reference program, it would be successful. And it was. So that's how I got into that.
Well, and I remember the days of Lotus database, to date myself. I used it back in the day, and it was painful. It got the job done, and back then it was probably a pretty powerful tool. But to go from Lotus database into what you did with Boulder Logic was like from a Ford Pinto to a Lamborghini, I think, at the time.
Thank you very much.
So you sold the company. Talk a little bit about how you evolved. You grew the company, then you sold it, and we'll talk about your little road trip as well, because I find that quite interesting.
So after selling the company, I was taking some time off, and I did some traveling. We purchased a Eurovan camper and kind of went all around the country and up into Canada. So that was nice to have that opportunity, and otherwise, to be able to split up that in a career is quite nice. But I certainly wasn't ready to retire. I connected with someone that I had done some work for and with previously. Actually, during the time that I was getting Boulder Logic off the ground, I was doing some consulting work, and one of the clients was WebRoot, so in the cybersecurity space. And one of the senior architects and developers over there had kind of branched off on his own with an idea around authentication security, but it was really just in very earliest stages, and he was looking for somebody that would help on the business side of the equation. So I connected with him and kind of got the company off the ground from there, really bootstrapping it, and I basically came in to bring sales and marketing and operations and kind of finance and bookkeeping and pretty much everything else that is associated with kind of a day one startup. We have, that was back in 2016. So we've done well since then, growing the company to a good size. It was profitable from early on. We've shifted kind of the focus a little bit from what was originally a tool focused towards APIs and software development security of login forms to something that's really more of a full enterprise authentication security product. And I'd be happy to talk more about that.
So you said something very interesting there. You bootstrapped this cybersecurity company. No investments. You're like a unicorn in a unicorn in a unicorn there.
Something like that. We brought some. I brought some of our own capital, and certainly didn't need to rush to have a lot of immediate funding on it. But I think that's a little bit around kind of my approach to entrepreneurship is I really want to get that product market fit right. And when you get it right, then all of a sudden you've got deals and customers and revenue coming in. And then it's just a question of, what kind of growth trajectory you're trying to accomplish. And we agreed as a company that, we would take it bootstrapping as long as far as we could. And that's the path that we're still on today.
How long did it take to decide what that market was and the rejiggering? Of course, it's an ongoing process, but before how long, you start, I think you start with the work back in 2017 on this new endeavor. So you're about 5-6 years old. Yeah.
We've been doing it for some time. It didn't take that long. I mean, certainly under a year of basically really talking to customers, prospective customers, and understanding kind of how they thought about what we were doing. As I said, the initial iteration of it was API based, and we had also a component that could be overlaid client side to validate passwords at the time they're being created or reset. And so the idea, fundamentally is there are a gazillion, you can quote me on that, of passwords that have been compromised in previous data breaches. And hackers know that they can use those passwords reliably to log in, either through password spraying or credential stuffing, because people reuse the same credentials so often. So if I can get credentials from a third-party breach, there's a high probability that I have your credentials that you're using today, not you, Tim or Patrick, but on average, that absolutely is still the case.
Tim never reuses his password.
No, it's always got special characters in it.
Couple special characters at the end. Change that
exclamation point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that was. The idea was 100%. How do you turn the ammunition used by attackers into a tool for defense? And even with the API and that client-side JavaScript login over or password reset overlay, we were able to check against a massive database of compromised passwords. And but as we talked to more prospective customers and companies, there were a couple different ways that we could take it. What we determined was trying to talk to developers was great, but really the decisions about security are happening in other parts of the organization, and so making it more appropriate to a CISO-based audience. Also, making it really easy to deploy. So really our flagship product at this point is an integration with Windows Active Directory. So it doesn't require, actually using our APIs, and it basically picks up where, well, it's a pretty low bar, but where Microsoft leaves off in terms of password security. And so that's, that was basically the journey of taking it from point A to point B. There's other, we've productized it in other ways, and the APIs are still a substantial portion of the business, but the majority of the business is making it really easy to integrate into your identity and access management system and basically keep unsafe passwords from getting into your organization and detecting when good passwords become compromised and resolving that when that occurs.
When you were getting into this 5 or 6 years ago, did you and your partners sort of look at market trends through other agencies like Gartner or data analysis to know that the future is in password security, that there was going to be a market or a market was blooming, or do you just that happened to be the technology that you guys knew and hopefully it worked out?
Well, so it was the kind of the technology that we knew, and there was just a clear problem. Like the findings came through the Verizon's data breach investigative report and Poneman and other research that was done that just showed the top cause of hacking related data breaches, and it remains to this day, stolen credentials.
Right.
And so it was kind of a aha type of, or pretty basic type of solution to address that. The other thing that happened pretty early on, so this would have been in 2017, the National Institute of Standards and Technologies completely rewrote their book on what a password policy needs to be. So NIST is basically the government organization that sets policy and process recommendations around cybersecurity. What they had been saying for decades was, you need a password that has a mix of uppercase and lowercase and symbols, and you need to require that to be changed every 60 or 90 days. And in 2017, they said, you know what, forget all that. We have to change that. And you don't have to worry about, you actually shouldn't worry about uppercase symbols, lowercase character composition. That went out because what they found was that when people are required to follow certain, I was going to say patterns, but it really ends up being patterns. When they're required to use certain characters, how they do that is very predictable. Like we talked, what you mentioned before, the symbol to the end, it's an exclamation mark, aha, right? So you think that you're going to get some randomization with character mixture, but it actually makes it easier to predict what you're going to use. And the same thing for password expiration, which is if you tell somebody that they're going to have to change their password every 60 days or 90 days, they just don't try that hard, or they follow incrementing that password character. Yeah. And so those changes through NIST gave us tremendous third-party validation. It wasn't us as a cybersecurity company saying, this is the future and the way to do things. It made it very easy for us to say, look at what NIST is saying, look at, what you're seeing from these other groups. And it really has trickled down to other standards bodies and, have people calling us who have been in audits and, they're being specifically told that they need to check passwords against and credentials against a blacklist of unsafe, previously compromised credentials. It's a long answer to the question.
No, it's a good one though. But you brought up, because something I noticed too in the recent Verizon report, that stolen credentials is still number one, but by a very large margin. It's not even a little bit, right? It's tremendous. And when you look at, what did they use them for? Obviously to break into web applications, but there's a giant market that's exploding around vulnerability patching and vulnerability management in web applications. Mm-hmm. But that's like 10%, and stolen credentials is like 90%. So are you getting, is your market just exploding? Is it just flooded with vendors now? Because you see something like that in a report and you got to think, well, that's where the money's going to, that's where the budget's going to go, right? And so all these companies start jumping into it.
It makes it a pretty easy sales cycle because it's like, when we make our pitch, nobody is like, yeah, I don't really get it. Everyone. Right. I think in some cases it's disappointing to, the director of cybersecurity and CISO because, it's not necessarily cool or sexy. It's like passwords, and they're looking for, give me AI that's doing this, and and so there's some element of that. And it, I think, applies to vendors also. I think vendors are more interested, or many vendors are more interested in how can I use something really advanced technology to be able to do that. So we have there's a handful of competitors that we compete with every day. Microsoft does offer something related to unsafe passwords, in particularly in Azure. but real limitations to it, and doesn't even address what NIST and others are recommending. In fact, doesn't even address some of their own internal and external recommendations around checking credentials and rechecking them and resetting passwords. But I could get into a whole thing around that. So, long story short, it's still a relatively we've established a nice place in the market. We compete with MFA and other types of biometric or other authentication security methods, but even when you use MFA, the whole purpose of it is multi-factor authentication. So if you're using token or some other one-time password that's going over another channel, you're still supposed to secure the memorized secret, which is the password.
Yeah.
And so for MFA to really realize its promise, it needs to be the hardest, most secure what layer, the password, and the what you have layer, the token or whatever device that you're talking about. And so it's been, I think, if we talk about trends, we believe that eventually the password will become less important as some of these other technologies take prominence, but there is such a long tail, and it's going to be so long before you're able to really get rid of passwords. And frankly, until you can actually say, I have no passwords in my system, I have no passwords in our environment, it just is like, it's crazy to allow folks to create a password that is floating around on the dark web and somebody can grab onto with only minutes of effort. It's just,
so your recommendation is for them to use your solution in concert with MFA, or can they just use your solution as a standalone?
Short answer is we absolutely advocate MFA. And we're big proponents of don't listen to us, listen to NIST, listen to these other groups, and basically the message there is MFA absolutely helps. Multiple layers absolutely helps. It's all about having multiple strong layers. You can't have any. Yeah. And so, we absolutely believe in it. The problem with MFA is it's tough. It's costly. It doesn't work with every device. It's hard to get actual adoption of it. So, until you can really assure that you have 100%, you really are relying on the password anyway. So the short answer is we absolutely recommend both. We're just here to secure the layer that you're already using and have already invested in.
I might press you a little bit on something you brought up, just because it's interesting to me and I don't know a lot about it. I'm not sure if you do, but the whole market of passwordless authentication and kind of what's happening there, and how do you see fitting into that, and why is it such a long tail, all that fun stuff around it? Because if you look at Gartner, they have this trends report, impact report, and these little circles on the propensity for people to buy that and the time frame. And I think passwordless was 5 to 10 years out, but a pretty high propensity to buy, which to me thinks, the market's really early, but there's a lot of money probably flooding into that. So just curious.
10 years out, it's 5 to 10 years ago also. People have been talking about getting rid of passwords for a very long time. It's just not as easy to do. There's a lot of complexity in it. There's some great work being done with FIDO2 and other standards to help bring touch and biometric and other things to websites and other elements, other technologies that will allow for a passwordless approach. And so we absolutely see those and encourage them. It's just in a lot of cases, well, there's a few things to think about it. In a lot of cases, it's a way of introducing convenience, but if you change your device or if you lose, you end up falling back to a password. They actually haven't gotten rid of the password. It's still there. It's just, if you can authenticate in through, a touch, it says, okay, that's the right person. But if you actually look behind the scenes, there are a lot of cases where passwordless is still kind of a marketing message and not reality.
Yeah, I see.
Plus all the complexities that I mentioned in terms of actually getting devices and consistent usage and all the rest of that. But yeah, we definitely agree that it's there's some really nice things about passwords in terms of being low cost, simple, allowing, device independent, like all those attributes will kind of drive decisions to keep passwords around even longer. There'll definitely be, forward companies that are, want to get right on the bleeding edge, and they will.
You're staying in business for some time.
Yeah, we're not worried. We're not really losing sleep over that at this point.
And if you and I had a prior conversation, Josh, the way I understand it, someone puts in a password, it'll actually check, which is built on your database via the dark web, to ascertain if that password has been compromised or is listed somewhere on the dark web. And if it is, then it notifies the user that it is compromised, and thus will force them to use a different password or come up with a different password combination. And then if, say Tim's along, his password's perfectly fine today, but he goes to log in, say 2 weeks from now, and suddenly that password's been compromised, it notifies him, and it sets up a time limit that within 24 hours of using the system, he has to enter a new password, or it forces him to do so. That's my understanding in terms of how it works with the Active Directory.
Yeah, there are two use cases, and it sort of hit them both. One is when you're creating a password, we want to make sure that the password that you're creating is not showing up in a cracking dictionary or floating around on the dark web. And if you try to propose a new password, we'll tell you that password is unsafe, it's been compromised, pick another password. That keeps unsafe passwords from getting into Active Directory. But once that password is in there, particularly if you follow NIST or Microsoft or SANS or other guidelines that say extend or get rid of password expiration, how do you know whether that password becomes compromised? It might show up in a data breach tomorrow. And so we do a continuous reevaluation, and that really helps to determine whether a password has become compromised. And if it has become compromised, we entirely automate the process of notification, remediation, requiring a password reset. So it's really, the thing that folks like about it is, unlike other forms of threat intelligence where something might be surfaced on the dark web and you say, well, okay, that's out there, what do we do about it? This is very clear, actionable, and solves the problem of keeping unsafe passwords out of your environment. And that's what we do.
And this is a B2B focus in terms of your business today, but it could be applicable to B2C as well. Is there thoughts to make it available maybe through some of the businesses that are out there that actually have passwords, so it becomes part of their solution? Maybe you're doing that already.
Oh, so yeah, we absolutely have OEM partnerships with some of the identity and access management providers. One of our customers that gets a tad of a good amount is LastPass. So, while that's not a pure identity and access management platform, as a password manager, they want to make sure that the passwords that their users are creating and adding to the vault are not compromised. We can help to also surface additional information about the exposures that a given username that has been part of a breach, basically reporting that out. So we definitely have looked at, if you call it B2B to B or B2B to C types of partnerships. Pure B2C, meaning us selling to my mom, is not something that we're really looking to pursue at this time. I think there's definitely a need for it. There are actually some things in some of the browsers that do some parts of that, but our aim is to help the IT manager or security, somebody who's responsible for security, to know that the passwords that their employees are using are safe. And that's really difficult for them to otherwise do, because the whole concept of passwords is the employee is supposed to be able to come up with their own guess, and the organization is not really supposed to know it. So we help to step in the middle there and say, well, we're still going to allow the employee to come up with whatever they want and have all the benefits that passwords offer, and I could list them out, but the key is we're going to help the user to know when they're using an unsafe password, and we're going to help the organization know that too, because otherwise they don't really have any way to know it.
So, as a founder and a COO and entrepreneur, you're always thinking about the next issue or problem, or what's the next wall that Enzoic has to climb over to reach its next stage in business growth. What's keeping you up at night, Josh?
We've got a number of new projects, some still in stealth and some, that are further along to expand the scope of the services that we provide. For the purpose of this conversation, we've really been talking about that Active Directory and corporate authentication or enterprise security. We do quite a bit, and you'll see more with integration into other types of systems and e-commerce and other platforms, and better intelligence and more expanded intelligence that can help with broader threat research types of use cases that tie back to what other information that's available on the dark web. So our initial focus was, how do we make this very precise, very actionable, solve a very binary problem? Are your passwords safe or not safe? And I think we've done that really, really well. There's a whole lot more on the dark web that opens up a whole host of different use cases. And our aim is to tick off other very actionable ways of helping organizations use that, as opposed to sort of more broader based threat intelligence data collection that kind of leaves the use case and the actions to the customer, to the organization. We see the value in being very I don't want to say prescriptive, but just making it easy. I mean, that's a big piece of what Enzoic is. How do you make this as easy as possible?
Your solution is super easy to deploy, I assume. It doesn't require a lot of time on the part of the system.
No, it's 15 minutes type of thing. If you've got we've got some clients that have tens of thousands of users, and they'll take it through all their different staging environments. But the actual process of setting it up is extremely quick, and that's by itself.
And pre-sales, I assume, is just as easy. If you connect to their system, you can tell them what percentage of passwords in their system right now are actually compromised. How does that work?
We have a auditor tool that's free. Anyone can run it. It's super, super lightweight. It does a scan in Active Directory to look at and to identify those passwords that are compromised and part of data breaches. So it's answering that question of which of your employees are vulnerable. We use it very much as a proof point of you kind of knew you had this problem. Let us show you how big it is. And so it can help establish a justification for those folks that need to get budget approval and the rest. But it's really very valuable in its own right to be able to know that. What it doesn't do is the two use cases that I defined: checking at the time that they're creating the password and the continuous monitoring. You could run the auditor tool every week if you wanted to, and it does use against our most current data, which changes every single day. But at some point, if you've been running this on a daily basis, a weekly basis, you're going to realize that we can fully automate that whole process, and it makes it a much more simple experience.
Is the percent compromise typically higher than what your prospect thinks? They think, oh, we're like 2-3%. And you tell them actually 15% of your passwords are compromised.
Yeah, on average, it's 20% or more. Wow. And that usually gives a little jaw drop. I think they kind of know, but they don't really want to know in some cases how bad the issue is. They know it's a problem. They know they need to do something about it. But it can be quite revealing. But look, at the end of the day, it takes only a single compromised account, particularly if someone's going to do a password spraying or a targeted attack. It just takes one account that they're able to get a foothold in to put your whole organization at risk. And so, in some respects, whether it's 5 accounts that are compromised, or 50% of your accounts they're currently floating around the dark web. They're really both problems. A smaller number is not necessarily an indication that you're safe.
One of the biggest challenges that we have at Kiteworks is, or at least going to market, is convincing our prospects that Microsoft isn't good enough. Meaning, like, they keep building, Microsoft keeps building cybersecurity solutions across everything, right? And so it's almost like everyone in cybersecurity right now's biggest competition is convincing the customer that Microsoft isn't quite there yet in this particular domain or this particular domain. And you mentioned them in the beginning. Could you elaborate on that? They're probably like sort of a frenemy with you.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they have put energy and intention into this is is a good validation that they understand and see the problem. And as I mentioned before, if you look at their the baseline configuration and recommendations, they're very vocal about having eliminating password expiration. In fact, if you did I forget exactly the name of it, there's an audit that you can run that just kind of goes through your security settings and sort of gives you a score based on how you've set it up. They actually decrease your score if you have a password expiration policy, because they know that having a password expiration policy leads to those poor choices on user bases. The issue is what they've introduced, and it's really only in Azure, it's not in on-prem AD, is a ability to check passwords at the time they're created. So that doesn't do anything to address the fact if you've disabled your password expiration policy, you need a way to determine whether that password becomes compromised. So that's one big hole that they've left. Other one is, they've acknowledged that they really aren't trying to go out and collect compromised passwords. Their blacklist is based on their own telemetry. So folks that are doing attacks against their own infrastructure, they're taking those passwords that they know to be used in those types of attacks and creating a blacklist based on that. Well, that's great. You can get a good starting list based on that, but that doesn't address regional differences. I mean, it's only kind of their stuff. It doesn't actually even include compromised passwords. So we have a team that goes out and collects passwords from, and really data breach information from the latest data breaches. And I'm sure you're aware, there are thousands of data breaches every year. In order to be able to say, hey, we found, Tim, your password and this username combination in this particular location, we need to get pretty deep. We're not just going and getting the low-hanging fruit or a free database, or like in Microsoft's case, just kind of a snapshot that they can automate from their own telemetry. We're going much deeper with a real threat research effort, human intelligence to get early access to things. And that means the breadth of what we're providing is much bigger and it's much more current. So if you really want to follow NIST or even Microsoft's own recommendations, they're really not offering that. And it'll be interesting to see. I mean, Microsoft's great at things that they can build if you fully automated. There's a human component of that threat research, and I don't know whether Microsoft wants to be in the threat research business in this respect. So we'll see. But for the time being, it really just allows a conversation to start with folks that are actually trying to keep unsafe passwords out of their organization.
Sure.
Your data comes from the dark web as well as these incidents. So you're combining resources or data from multiple sources, if I understand correctly. It's a bit ironic that you built a business based on data that's coming from the dark web to combat the dark web.
Exactly. Yeah. We like that position where we can basically foil hackers' efforts by basically using their own tools against them. In this case, their own data against them. Yes, you're right. Our threat research includes both actors infiltrating places to get access to this information. We also use honeypots and our own telemetry. So that same technique that we just described that Microsoft's using, but we just go a lot deeper.
As a as a marketer, I think I just have one more question for you. How are you getting the market's attention? What is your message that, because you're one of, let's say, 10,000 security vendors out there. There's a limited pool of IT security professionals. Have you found that message that that just hits it every time once you can have the conversation, or is it always an adjustment?
You know, we do quite a bit of inbound marketing to try to catch people when this is something that they're thinking about. A big driver for us is, frankly, folks that have audits that have been flagged as something that they need to address, whether because they're required to comply with NIST. And so, you know, that aligns well with the inbound marketing. The message in terms of resonance is pretty simple. It's like, you know, have you ever reused a password? And the answer is, even, you know, the most vigilant is it will say yes. And they certainly understand that their employees do. It's just a question of what they want to do about it and how quickly. Because we're relatively low cost and relatively low friction to put in place, sales cycles tend to be pretty short. And yeah, we're always, you know, looking for new ways to grow awareness and broaden you know, the market that we reach.
Yep.
One thing I find fascinating about your business, and this is a outside conversation that you and I had, is you're 100% US-based business. You don't outsource any of these tasks or activities or development offshore. It's all onshore. That's rare in you know, today's global economy. You know, how did you do that, and is there a reason why you decided to build a 100% US-based business?
So, you know, I briefly mentioned the CTO when I started and explained how I kind of got to know him, but I hold him in very, very high respect. And this is, you know, he was very clear that he wanted to keep very tight control. We're, you know, like many identity-related and cybersecurity companies generally, you know, there's a target on our back that hackers would love to get access to what we have, and a big piece of what we do is you know, value associated with, you know, the data that we've created and other things that we wanted just to have a really tight control over that. So to his credit, he has been able to build a very efficient team of people that he's worked with that have long experience in cybersecurity and threat related research. You know, we don't have something that's hard and fast that we might, you know, never expand beyond that, but we found it to work very well, and so yes, we are 100% US based.
That's great. That's feather in your cap and a huge success. So how can folks who are listening to this podcast find out more on Enzoic, or to get in touch with you for a demo or for one of those audits that we discussed?
Yeah, I mean, our website is absolutely the easiest place, enzoic.com, enzoic.com. You'll see right kind of off the main nav access to the auditor tool, which we call Enzoic for Active Directory Lite. And that's free and very easy to use. There's nothing required with that. We also have a startup plan of the full Active Directory product. So if you have under 20 users in your organization, you don't have to pay us. You're just welcome to start to use it. And even for large organizations, that can be a nice way to you know, start to roll it out or get a sense of it in a real environment. We have we also have some nice demo recordings. So there's like a really short one that I think gives the kind of the major points in 2 minutes, and we can actually do a full walkthrough of the product in about 6 minutes. If you want to jump on the phone, we're happy to spend, you know, a full half an hour with you or answer specific questions. But there's quite a bit on the website that help to allow folks to evaluate themselves without, you know, kind of giving over their birth certificate and other, you know, details before working with us. But I would start on the website. Is a great place, and you'll see ways to contact us there as well.
this is a product I think a marketer dies to market. It's so easy, right? The business case.
It's pretty straightforward.
Easy to prove its value. It's it definitely has some nice attributes from a marketer's perspective. So I do feel fortunate that way.
Well, Josh, we really appreciate your time. This has been a fascinating conversation. I learned a lot about the dark web and passwords, among other things. And it's always great to reconnect with you. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks, Josh.
It was nice to meet you too. Spend time
This
together.
wraps up another Kitecast. You can check out other Kitecast at kiteworks.com/Kitecast.